I'm your host, Sean McKenzie. Thanks for joining once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we go back to our WebForms playlist, and we're going to take a look at how to create a combo box or a drop-down list, as it may be called in different environments. And we're going to take our little tow operations database that we made for a tow truck operation, and we're going to take one of the fields that we already have in there. We're going to convert it to a combo box so that the data can be standardized, and that will make it much easier for reporting and all kinds of other things. Let's get to it. Interested in more content like this? Make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. Okay guys, so this is a really fun continuation of what we did last time. This is our little tow application. There's the driver field, and we want to change that to a combo box just like you see here, and we can get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use our SQL Server Management Studio, which we covered in previous episodes. Make sure you go back to the start if you haven't done that yet. We created this database in Azure, so that is an Azure SQL database called Tow Operations, and we are going to open that using our SSMS here, and then we can open our databases and go to our Tow Operations database, and we're going to be able to get started here. Now this takes a minute. Sometimes it takes a minute to refresh because it is connecting to the internet, and that database is on Azure, but we can see here we've got our tables. We can just go right click and create a new table, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a little lookup table to hold all of the names that we want for our tow truck drivers. And so what we'll do is we'll do kind of a similar thing to what we might do in a regular production system. We'll create an ID column. We're going to make it the equivalent of a Microsoft Access auto number for those of you who are Access developers. And so we'll set that identity seed or identity specification to yes, and the seed means that it's going to start at 1, and the increment means that it's going to go up by 1 each time, just like an auto number. And so we'll make the second field nvarchar, which is basically a text field, and that one we'll leave it as nulls, allowing nulls, and then we can go ahead and just hit save, and then we'll call this one tow driver. And so now we've got a little table. We'll save that, and of course now we can use that table for our lookup. Now in the Explorer on the left, you might need to right click and go refresh in order to see your new table, so don't be afraid if you don't see that it's there. Many times you just need to refresh all of that stuff, and we can also right click and go to edit top 200 rows, and we can do a little bit of data entry into our new table, and we're going to do that now. We're going to put in the 3 drivers that were originally there, Harry, Randy, and Susan. We'll just type those guys into some fields here on our Azure SQL database, and then we'll add some new ones. We'll put Mary, John, and say Winston. There we go. So we've got 3 old names, and we've got 3 new names, and we want to have all of those in there. Now we can maintain this list as an operation. We can maintain the list ourselves, and people will not make spelling mistakes if we use this as a drop-down list. They will choose it from a list. So I hit the right click and select top 1000 just to display our data to make sure that it is still there, and then we're done with SQL Server Management Studio. So I've opened our tow operations application that we've been working on, and you can see down the right hand side, that's our Explorer. We went through all of this in the introductory episode, plus a couple other episodes where we added things like updating fields and date fields and things like that. And we've been primarily working on this default.aspx here. And you can see when I double click on it, it brings up the default. This is our HTML source that we use in .NET, and it's very much like HTML, but it has some .NET goodies in there, and that's in the source view. And so if I scroll back up to the top here, we can actually switch over to the design view just like we did in previous episodes, and you can see the same objects except in a more graphical view. And so as I mentioned before, don't be afraid to work in this view or in the source view. You can actually work in the split view where it shows both of them at the same time. And today what we're going to do is we're going to be working on that driver text box. Now we actually do not want to have a text box anymore. We want to have a drop-down list or a combo box for those of you who are Access developers. So this is a text box right now. It's called txt driver, and what we want to do is we want to change it to a combo box, and we can do that very easily by switching to the source and just making a few changes to the source here. And so we can go ahead and change the name of it. So we're going to change it to CBO driver for combo driver instead of TXT, which is a text box. And so that'll change the name, but we're also going to change the object type here. So we'll put an ASP drop-down list as our type there. And so you can see now we've got a different object. We've got a drop-down list. It's called CBO driver. That's the name, the ID of it, and then it's going to run at the server. And we've got the same width that we had before, and that's all we really need for today. There's all kinds of other stuff that we can do, but if I switch back to the design view, you can see, look at that. Now we've got a drop-down list there, and it says unbound, and we are going to bind that at runtime when our page loads up. And so that's going to be a really neat thing for us to do. It allows you to make very dynamic drop-down lists or combo boxes, and that's fantastic. So what we'll do is we go back to our source, and then we can hit view and then code, or you can just hit the F7 key and it'll take you. One of the pages will open to the right there sometimes, and the other one will open to the left, or they might open together at the top there with the tabs. But this is our code here. So this is the code that we did in our previous episodes, and you can see here this is the selected index change event, which is kind of like when something is selected in the list. And then we've got an update button that we did where we update the data in there. So these are all things we did in previous episodes. You can check those out. But today what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at loading that combo in the page load event. So that's what happens when the page first loads up. And you can see right now all that it does when it loads up is it refreshes that grid view list that we have of all of our tow truck operations, and it's calling that subroutine. And you can see that subroutine has two references. That means we reused it, and we want to make sure that when we code something new that we code it into its own subroutine so that we can call it multiple ways. And so we did that with refresh list. It was called in two different places, and we only have one place to call update combos today. But what we'll do is we'll create our subroutine called update combos, and then we'll call it in that page load event that you see up above there. So we'll do kind of similar to what we did in the previous episode. We're going to do a little try catch block here, and what we're going to do is we'll load up our combo drop down boxes and we'll be good to go. So the first thing we'll do here is create a comment at the top so that developers know what's going on with this subroutine. And then we'll go ahead and we're going to make some variables. So the first variable that we'll create is our connection string, similar to what we did before when we loaded a grid view. And we'll do the same thing we did before. We're going to get that connection string out of the web.config file, which is where we have it stored right now. And so the configuration manager is going to get that for us safely, and then we'll go ahead and get the connection set up. So the connection we'll set up as a new SQL client.sql connection, and we'll put in that connection string in order to make that connection to our server. After that, we'll set up a new data set. That's going to be a data set in memory. It's going to receive the table or the result of whatever we query from the database. And then we'll create a SQL string, which is going to basically be our selection from the database, and we can use that when we load the data adapter. And so there we go. We can select our driver name. And the driver name, we're going to get 2 fields for this query, and then we're going to go from tow driver, which is the name of the table we created, and then we can order by the driver name field. Now we've got 2 fields in there, and that's because the drop-down list or the combo box actually has 2 options. One is for the value and one is for the display, or whatever you want the text to be displayed. And so we're actually going to change that driver name eventually to an ID. Now you could actually use a real ID. So if you actually had a numeric ID and your table was normal, or your database was normalized, you could actually just put the numeric ID in the first field, and that will be very handy if you're storing just the IDs. But for today, we're actually just going to store the name for simplicity, and then we can move on. So we've got our data adapter. That's the next thing we build. We're going to do new SQL client.sql data adapter. We'll put in the SQL string and the connection object, and then we'll fill that using dpt.fill. And that we're going to fill that into our data set, and we'll give that table in the data set the name TTMP driver for a temporary table, since it is gone as soon as this procedure is over. And then we'll make a reference to that table. We'll say our table TBL data as a data table is equal to our data set tables TTMP driver. And what do we do with that table once we've got it in memory? We're going to load our combo box or our drop-down list with the data that is in that table, and that's exactly what we want to do. So we're going to say CBO driver.data source is equal to TBL data, and then we'll say CBO driver.data bind, and that's gonna basically bind that data to the data source, and then we'll close our connection. We're going to dispose of our data table object, and we'll dispose of our data adapter, and then we'll dispose of our connection object as well. Now you can also do this with the using keyword. I didn't do that in today's episode. We'll do that in a future episode that's a little more advanced, and we'll just close off here by setting our exception block, which is essentially what happens when there's an error. We'll just say put in the label, the status label, put in the error message so we can see it on screen if something goes wrong, and that's what happens when we get an exception. So we've got just about everything we want there. There's our connection string, our connection object. Our data set is going to get filled with data. We've got our string, our data adapter, and we've got our data in a data table. We're going to fill that combo box, and then we're going to put it into the page load event. So every time the page is loaded, we're gonna run this. So what we'll do is when we do that is we'll just put update combos in here for now, and then we can go ahead and take a look at what's going to happen with now that we changed the name, because we did change the name of our txt box, so we need to now go and we're just going to go and look for those errors, because now we're not going to be saying txt-driver.text is equal to that driver. We're actually going to say cbo-driver.selected value is equal to the driver that of whatever that we click on. And so we want to set those values so we can go ahead and fix those. We're gonna go ahead and we'll change that txt-driver.text. We'll say cbo-driver.selected value. So this is the other way. We're actually, updating the database. And then when we clear out these selections, we won't clear out the combo box today because we didn't put sort of a blank entry in there. So we're going to leave that as sort of a to-do. Maybe we can put a generic select into there to make it empty. But for today, what we're going to do is we're just going to leave it loaded on the screen, even if we clear out the rest of the fields, and we can sort of continue on. So now you can see on the right hand side there, we don't have any errors in our code that the system is picking up, but we do want to make a couple of changes. We'll make that first row unique there, that driver name as ID. So we're going to make those two field names unique, and then we'll also after we do our data source, we're going to set the data value field equal to ID. That's something that we set up above there. And then we'll also set the data text field equal to the driver name. So you can see how those match up. You can see the ID field is equal to the ID field, and then the driver name is equal to the driver name. And if you had a numeric ID, like I said before, that you wanted to store and not display to the user, that's where you would do it using the ID field, and that's exactly how that works. And then the next thing we want to do is we're going to go up to our page load event, and we are going to make a quick update here. Now we did put our update combos in there. Now we do want refresh list to update every time the page is loaded. However, we don't want the update combos to update every time, because that'll set the value back to whatever the default is, whatever the first value in the list is. And so we want to make sure that we put in this command here saying, if it's a post back, then don't continue this subroutine. Basically exit the sub, because we only want the update combos to update when the page is first displayed, not after things have been updated or anything like that. And so now that we've got that update in there, we can go ahead and hit our play button, or you can use the F5 key on your keyboard, and that will kick off the application. And you can see here now I've got the application running locally on my computer, so I have not published it yet. You can see there's our combo box, so we no longer have a text box in our application, which is exactly what we want to see there. And we want to be able to click on this and have it. So it does update with the drivers for each row, and that's what we want to see there. And if we click through here, you can see it is selecting the right one and keeping the selection in the combo box there. Now if I click on this Jeep YJ one here with Harry and I change it to John, search down my form here for the update button, and I click the update button, and I should see, if I click off of that row and I select around here and go back to the Jeep YJ row, we should see John as the driver for that one. Okay, so the update is working. That's what we want to see there. And so very happy about that. That's exactly what we want to see, and that is a good update. So what do we do next? Well, we publish it to our Azure app service so that our online application out in the cloud is published, and so we'll go to the build menu and choose publish, and then you can see it's got our profile here already loaded. That's our Azure App Service in Windows. We set all of that up in a previous episode. Make sure you go back to those if you have not done those ones yet, and we can hit publish, and you can see that it is going through the motions here, publishing to Azure App Service. And that takes a moment for it to get published, and then it will go and fire up your it'll fire up the online application in your browser, whatever your default browser is. So I'm going to go and grab that now, and you can see there is our login. It went through the login information which we set up previously. Those are all Windows logins. And you can see this nice, tooperations.azurewebsites.net, which you can change to your own URL. We'll cover that in a future episode. If you're interested in that, make sure to comment in the section below. Now let's take a look at this. So if I click on the rows here, it looks like our online app is working great. I can click on all the different rows, and our combo box or drop-down list is updated with the right driver each time. You can see there are all our selections, and that's exactly what we want to see there. Looking for more resources for your project? Make sure to check out the additional links in the description.